Okay, so this is Realism and the Value of Explanation by Samuel John Andrews in Philosophical Quarterly. I guess this is from 2018. And Cinesemiotics recommended this. So, yeah, as always, first read through. Anyone new here, got a bunch of people in chat. Feel free to ask questions along the way, and then you'll be part of the review at the end if you stick around. You can review it, and that'll get put up on the internets. Realism and the Absence of Value. 1-1, Realism and Value. Lewis 84 Insider 2011 are realists about natural properties. They assert that natural properties carve the world up in a metaphysically correct way. In turn, when theorizing where theorizing is understood as an activity that aims to accurately describe the world, they uphold using natural properties to be better than otherwise. They make the normative claim that natural properties ought to follow and feature in theories that they possess value-theoretic upshots. Dasgupta poses a serious challenge to this value-theoretic claim by arguing that there is no acceptable account of why natural properties deserve the value realists assign to them. The objection principally rests on endorsing an explanatory account of normativity and then demonstrating that there is no explanation for why the realists' natural properties deserve value. Alright, so it's like, alright, we'll get to it, but basically it's saying, hey look, what's going to be in your theory? Is it real stuff? Like natural things? Like, I don't know, sky, maybe? And what's the value of those things? Normativity. To see how Dasgupta's argument works, it is important to clarify explanatory normativity before showing how the realists fail to explain. Ironically, as Dasgupta notes, his argument is a normative adaptation of Lewis's fair play argument. To play fair, one must demonstrate why the property deserves value before asserting that it is valuable. Call this explanatory normativity. So that is, if a property ought to feature in theories, then there must be an explanation for why it ought to feature in theories. Explanatory normativity affirms that if a property lacks an explanation for why it has value, the property is not valuable. Alright, so it's like, if you want to ask somebody why something's valuable, they have to be like, okay, it is valuable, and then, otherwise no. Oh dear. It is rainy out there. I hope everything holds on here. After accepting explanatory normativity, Dasgupta argues that there is no explanation for why natural properties deserve value. Okay, so this was written by a guy working at the University of Birmingham and would be so much more entertaining in a Brummie accent. I'm sorry, I can't really do a Birmingham accent, but I don't know if Dasgupta is actually from that area, but he might be. The realist might appeal to the connections between natural properties laws, causation, or induction to explain, but none of these moves are adequate. The problem chiefly stems from the realist being restricted to unfair accounts that reiterate natural properties as aligning with the world's natural structure, or paraphrasing natural properties as being really natural, but do not in any reasonable capacity explain why they have value. Any claim that natural properties matter because the world has an objective, natural structure assumes theories ought to adhere to the world's metaphysical structure before showing that such a posit deserves to feature in theories. Realists cannot affirm their metaphysical posit to have value until they have shown the metaphysical posit to be something worth valuing. Don't call it naturalness until you've shown that it is something that should guide our theorizing. Hey, Tiny Spider Danger, what's up? Google Def. Demigods are usually ascended mortals that haven't had time to establish a large church yet. Put me to sleep in a Brummie accent. Yeah. So this is the thing. You can't claim something's natural unless you have a theory of what it is to be natural. But then, how do you do that? You already have to have a theory to be of naturalness and why that matters to then claim something's natural. But that gets you into a circularity right there. So this is one of these things. When people want to claim something like is good, well, then you have to ask for why it's good. If you want to claim why something's natural, you have to see why it's natural. So you're getting yourself into a... Dasgupta's shown that you just can't call something natural. That's one of these words that, it's a weasel word, basically. It's what people say when they don't want to explain something. They say, oh, it's natural, or this is just real. And, it's a weasel word, because it's basically them trying to say something has value without explaining why it has value. So, you have to be very worried about this. And you can see this everywhere, because they say, oh, this is an all-natural product. Really? It didn't come from Mars? Of course it's natural. Everything comes from the Earth is natural in some sense. It doesn't have any like inherent meaning, but they want you to think it's good. And so that's why you see all natural all the time. And there's no objective definition of natural, and especially not in the US when you can say a lot of shit about stuff. So it's like maybe you mean organic, but like again, rocks are organic. I wouldn't suggest you eat rocks. So Tinderis, yeah, it's all well, people claiming to use natural in a positive way without explaining what's positive about it, that's definitely circular. It's almost always circular. Viper says, Aretha Franklin, you make me feel like a natural woman. Dasgupta, actually, I think you'll find that I don't want to get laid. Yeah. And, I mean, what's that? That's, not Aretha. You make me feel, that's, King. Yeah. I think her name's King. What the hell is it? Right? The fuck. You make me feel, but whatever, yeah. Had the same with something about God. I think he used the term true. Yeah, well, this is what happens. People have to appeal to something that they think is fundamental, but then they don't want to, they can't explain why, and it goes circular. That happens a lot. Very common reasoning pattern people use. So I'm like, this is the thing. Just don't call it naturalness. Like you can call it whatever you want, but like you can't call it naturalness because that doesn't actually inherently have meaning on its own. What the fuck is that lady's name? Carole King. Yeah, Frank. Thank you. So it's also Carole King like had a lot of people sang her song. So yeah, it was. I'm sure Aretha did sing it, but I was trying to remember the writer. Tindera says I also asked him why, and he just got angry and said, "'Cause it's true." Yeah, well, that's what happens. You call people out, they get angry. Yeah. So, to further substantiate the objection, one could, for comparison, propose that the world actually has an objective gratural. Okay, so now they're just making up words for shits and giggles. Okay, it was on Aretha recorded originally, yeah. Because Carole King wrote some ridiculous number of like pop hits, and I mean like a ludicrous number of pop hits. Like her and her husband there was a whole thing here on Broadway about it. She has some like ludicrous number of pop hits, and like for other people. And then she was just like, well, screw it, I'm gonna start singing myself. She could sing, and she got like famous in her own right. And then she was like singing her own songs, and I was like, you wrote all those songs? It's crazy. So yeah. All right, so now they've made up a word called gratural, not natural structure. This is gratural, where gratural properties are those altered in a projective manner, like grew, if observed in a time before t being green, or if not observed before time t being blue, where t is some point in the future. Okay, on the assumption that properties are amply cheap, there may be many second-order properties like natural, gratural. Okay. Make up any word you want, and like it'd be some variation on being natural, that range over contrasting first-order properties like green or grew or whatever, any of which have claim to being valuable if we first posit the world to have a corresponding metaphysical structure. Like this is just the way the world is. It's one of these things like natural, but maybe not exactly natural. If natural properties have value because they accord with the world's natural structure, then there is just as much reason to think that gratural properties have value because they accord with the world's gratural structure. As Dasgupta writes, don't say naturalness is itself natural and graturalness is not, for we are in the middle of trying to explain why naturalness matters. Or we're just making up words now, claims someone called Nogrio. Well, we do make up names, Vipers. Gratitude, that's what we do. We don't just make up weird, in philosophy we make up weird words, but we make up a lot more names than we make up words. So, yes, Vipers, that is how it is. In summary, explaining the value of properties is a requirement for a property to have value. Realists do not satisfy this demand, and therefore realism is absent of value. In turn, Dasgupta goes on to argue for anti-realism, whereby natural properties are just those we prefer. Yeah, because like if you call something real, what is real? Well, they're saying it's natural. Well, it's natural. Well, it's just the things that are real. You're getting circularity, and Dasgupta points that out, and so you can't really claim naturalness does anything, but it's just Dasgupta saying it's just those things we prefer. It's just like your opinion, man. Okay? The preferences of theorizers explain why certain properties ought to feature in theories, and no objectively correct set of properties possesses value. No correct set of properties possesses value theoretic upshots. Yeah, so there is no meta level way of saying these are good properties. Two critiques. So what happens if you throw a natural rock at Dasgupta's head? Well, it wouldn't be a natural. The throw itself wouldn't be a natural property. So that would be artificial, and I think he would just say, I prefer you not do that. For clarity, let's see. What's the first name here? Samuel, let's see. Oh yeah, we're looking at Dasgupta 2018, so let's go find that out. I don't know, Surendranath, if that's it. Just here. We can look this up very fast, though. Oopsie. Actually, what am I doing? Go here, go here. It's going to be... What'd I do? Sorry about that. I hope I didn't break anything. Shamik. This is Shamik Dasgupta. I thought it was Shamik, but yeah. I really hope I didn't break my OBS right there. So, Shamik Dasgupta. Thank you, Vipers. I really don't know what happened there. I was hitting Control F to search for Dasgupta, and I was on the wrong window, and OBS just was like freaking out. Okay, I think I've heard Shamik Dasgupta talk. I think. Let me go find out. Let's go click on his name real fast. Do I know this person? Where did he get it? It's from UC Berkeley. Nowadays. Let's see, what did he write on? I don't know. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. Not sure. Okay. So we were here, we were here, we were here. Alright, cool. Two critiques. With the problem and some of its implications stated, I will now work towards responding. However, first, a crucial distinction needs clarifying. Dasgupta notes that his objection could be that realists lack an objective explanation for why natural properties are valuable, or it could be that realists lack an explanation relative to our preferences for why natural properties are valuable. The argument runs differently depending on what assumptions are made and which notions of explanation is in play. On the one hand, if realism is assumed, an explanation construed in distinctly realist terms, where the explanation must appeal to objective facts, then the objection to realism is a reductio. So we assume realism, like we're talking about the real world, assume explanatory normativity, so you're explaining things about the real world. He got his PhD at NYU. See, I think I've run into him once or twice years ago. So in New York, it's possible. From 1 and 2, there must be an explanation that meets the realist objective standards for why only natural properties have value. Okay, so yeah, if you're realism and there's things that are, it should be really normative, like that has value, then you should have a realism explanation for why they have value. There is no explanation for why only natural properties have value, and therefore realism is false, and this contradicts the first premise assuming realism. Call this argument where realism is assumed the internal criticism. On the other hand, if anti-realism is assumed, an explanation construed in distinctly anti-realist terms, where the explanation can appeal to the subjective preferences of theorizers, then the objection to realism runs as follows. Assume anti-realism. So we're not talking about anything in the world, maybe just our opinions. Assume explanatory normativity. From 1 and 2, there must be an explanation that meets the anti-realist, non-objective standards for why natural properties have value. So it's like something about you. That's why these things have value. Anti-realists explain the value of natural properties in virtue of our preferences. Yeah, something about you. Highlighter. Theorizers with contrasting preferences confer value to contrasting properties. 5 contradicts the realist claim that only natural properties have value, therefore realism is false. Yeah, because like people's opinions differ, so therefore there is no objective reality. Alright, so call this argument where anti-realism is assumed the external criticism. The external criticism is that without making assumptions only a realist would agree to, the realist is ineffective at convincing the anti-realist, or even a fence-sitter, that their view is correct. The internal criticism makes the stronger claim that realism is indefensible on its own terms. As I state at the end of the next section, responding to both is important to exonerate realism. Okay, so this person's trying to defend realism here. Explanation and value, the internal criticism. To begin, when assuming realism, like that there is some nature out there and then like natural things are good because that's how the world is, the demand to explain why natural properties are valuable might well be a fair one, but it is not a request a realist needs to acquiesce to. By not assuming explanatory normativity and denying premise 2 of the internal criticism, no reductio obtains. In place, an alternative principle affirming that some properties ought to feature in theories without explanation is needed. Primitive normativity. If a property ought to feature in theories, there does not need to be an explanation for why it ought to feature in theories. So I just guess like things just are this way. It's just how it is, man. Primitive normativity affirms that some properties should feature in theories as a brute fact. Realists who accept primitive normativity take it as a basic commitment of their view that natural properties have value theoretic upshots. Yeah, so this is the double down position. You're saying, yeah, I don't need to explain myself, asshole. This is just how the world is, because I'm a realist and this is just how the world is. These things have value. Initially, this might seem to be just as much of a concession as is a reply. Yeah, because it sounds like you're being just an asshole about stuff. But, like, that's not a problem either. Hey, why am I in the wrong selector? There we go. Text selection, there. Okay. Desgupta argues that realists lack an explanation for the value of natural properties, and my suggestion is to accept natural properties as possessing unexplained value. However, remember that this is a defense of realism from the internal criticism. It is an argument against the charge that realism cannot defend itself on its terms. Realists assert that the world does exhibit objective structure and therefore natural properties are valuable because theories are about the world. Yeah, this is just the double down says. It says, yeah, I'm talking about the world and I am talking about the world and there's nothing you can do about it. What are you going to do? This contravenes explanatory normativity, but it does not unavoidably falsify realism. Yeah, because you're not saying why, but you're just saying it is. There is an obvious out in accepting a different realist-friendly conception of normativity. Yeah, so if you just can declare yourself to be this is the way the world is, okay. Okay. To clarify the normative proposal, the value resulting from accepting primitive normativity is best understood as a kind of intrinsic value, understood equivalently to non-instrumental value. Yeah, well, this is, this is the double down position. This happens a lot where it just says no, this is primitive and you have to, and this is what we accept, and it's like, well, if you don't accept it, well, you are deficient then. It's basically the I will fight you. It's like you're just going to insult the other person. It's a you don't understand reality sort of thing. Generally intrinsically valuable properties. See, this is where the author went. Intrinsically valuable. What would be intrinsically valuable? You have to be able to recognize it intrinsically. If you don't recognize it, you are deficient. So this is literally like you are a deficient human being if you don't understand what I'm talking about. Like, it's getting towards the I will fight you level. Generally, intrinsically valuable properties are valuable in and of themselves with nothing outside the properties determining why they have value. See, yeah, it says like you have to understand. And if you don't understand, you're stupid. This kind of value is not instrumental, ethical, or prudential, but instead a kind of epistemic value. As the normative proposal is primitive, analysis of it is going to have its limits. However, I have provided a functional account by stating what role the value plays and how it relates to other comparable conceptions of value. Any further analysis of how intrinsic value pertains to natural properties, stating precisely how science identifies the value of properties, is beyond the scope of this proposal. Ultimately, it is better to theorize with natural properties, and this value is derived from their intrinsic value. So yeah, it's like, yeah, this is the this is just the way the world is. Importantly, as the normative proposal is primitive, it entails accepting a certain degree of epistemic humility. Primitive normativity constitutes a concession to the idea that theorizing about reality might not be coextensive with reality. Yeah, this is bite the bullet. You're saying, I don't know. This is just the way the world is, and you can't even look into it. This is just the way it is. So it's like, this is the concession. And that there may be features of reality whose value we are never able to explain, but are no less significant, and these features arise in cases alike the value of natural properties. So yeah, not only is it the way the world is, I'm not telling you any more about it. It just is the way the world is, and you might not be able to find anything more out of it. It's primitive. So it's like, it's valuable and it's primitive, and you can't go looking. Viper says, if language is quantized statistical representation of reality, then the syntax can be manipulated to rationalize any preferred theory. Yeah. You can basically manipulate whatever you want in logic to almost any degree. To, you know, bite whatever bullet you want. The question is, do you actually want to bite those bullets? Do you want to do that? How bad will it mangle the rest of the world? But, like, you can make as many epicycles as you want. You can mangle the world if you're willing to bite that bullet. That's correct. But, like, it gets harder and harder. And it's like, as you were joking before, do you want to get laid? You will not be, there's a limit to, like, what you will be fucking up in the world. At least he's not threatening anyone with pokers. Yeah, I mean, swing the poker, Wittgenstein. The key difference is that Dasgupta seems motivated by the idea that we ought only to attach normative significance to that which we can explain, while the realist should accept no such assumption. Wait, what? You did that once? You swung a poker at people? Wittgenstein got into a fight with Carnap. Not really a fight. They were both together in, like, you know, some, like, sitting room with, like, a fireplace, and, like, Wittgenstein, like, had the poker out and was, like, swinging around, like, trying, like, being very, like, you know, emotional and about it. Very, you know, running around with the poker, and he was, like, swinging it, and, like, basically he was getting way too close to Carnap with a steel poker. So, yeah. So there's a running thing in philosophy that, like, Wittgenstein and pokers are, like getting up in people's faces. Okay, so yeah, so the realist should say just bite the bullet, double down. Compared to Witt's response to Putnam's model theoretic argument when he argues that realists ought to freely accept every proposition we think is true might be false simply as a consequence of believing the world is altogether independent of theorizing. Analogously, realists about natural properties should accept that every property we think is natural might be unnatural as a consequence of believing nature's joints exist entirely independent of theorizing. Yeah, so, like, sure, if the world was different, it would be different, but as it's not, this is just how it is. Viper says, oh, paramilitaries tried to tell me to get out of my neighborhood because I was dating a girl from the other side of the religious divide, so I grabbed the closest thing of poker and went to their place and beat the shit out of them. See, that seems like a very practical thing to do in the time, but, like, that is very, is very pragmatic, practical. That's, basically probably the right thing to do, but it doesn't normally happen in philosophy, except there is a famous story where it did happen in philosophy with Wittgenstein, so yeah. However, adopting primitive normativity does lead to a further challenge as outlined by Dreyer. For moral realism, whereby even if the realist takes it as a brute fact that some facts are normative, this is not in itself good reason to think that no explanation is required. Just because one adopts the stance that some normative fact is unexplained does not support the other affirmation that no explanation is needed. Yeah, just because you take one thing as unexplained doesn't mean you get out of explaining everything. That's fair. You once beat a guy who had a knife with 2 glass doors. Yeesh. Yeah, that's like scary stuff. In other words, there should be a second order explanation why no explanation is correct. Yeah, so now you have to say, well, I don't have to explain it, but I have to explain why I don't have to explain it. For realists, no first order explanation is the correct approach because intrinsic value cannot be explained in a way that satisfies the standards of explanatory normativity. If the value of natural properties is inherent to natural properties, then the only viable first-order explanation for why they have such value must appeal to natural properties and their innate value. In turn, this explains the absence of explanation. So they're raising it up. If it's natural and has value, then at the meta level, it still has value. Door won against a knife? Yeah, well, a lot of times if you're using weapons, reach really matters, and a door is a lot bigger than a knife, so yeah. Okay, this defense of realism shares some structural similarities with Sider's reply to Dasgupta. However, there are some substantial differences. First, I explicitly concede to an unproblematic explanatory deficit while Sider is not so conciliatory. Second, I employ intrinsic value and use this to answer the second order challenge while Sider employs an externalist conception of value in his argument. Thirdly, Sider believes joint carving to also be instrumentally valuable. That's saying that our logic or reasoning carves the world at its joint. So like when I say A and B, the world is actually like this, that you can conjoin things the way our logic sort of does that. And so the author here is not talking about joint carving. Okay, lastly, and the most significantly, Pache, Sider, and Lewis, I do not believe that responding to the internal criticism alone is sufficient to diffuse Descupta's detonation. Putnam decried Lewis's response to his model theoretic arguments as just more theory, and a similar challenge applies to the realists' value claims are just more unexplained value. Yeah, if you're just claiming it has value, then you haven't explained anything, it's just more of it. Lewis responded by reiterating a strong commitment to realism. If I am looking in the right place for a saving constraint, then realism needs realism. Similarly, Sider adopts a defensive stance, for it is no part of the mission to convince Desgupta or even offend Sider that the outlook is correct. Yeah, see, again, these are all just forms of doubling down, biting the bullet. It says, hey, look, we're realists. We're only going to answer with more realism. Critically, addressing only the internal criticism raises a serious dialectical worry, as there is no case for accepting realism unless one is already a realist. This leads to philosophical stalemate, and debate over metaphysical realism has already arrived at such an impasse. The realist claims their objectors are caricaturing their position if it is not understood through the lens of suitable realist assumptions, and their objectors claim that making such assumptions is dogmatic. We may well spend our time transporting sand to the beach if we concern ourselves solely with those who already accept our views. To provide any useful development to the dialectic, one cannot maintain a defensive stance. Accordingly, I will now advance a defense of realism on unfriendly grounds. Okay, so this person's trying to be impressive here. They're trying to say, I'm going to defend realism against all the people who don't like realism, which is, I don't know if you know who these people are. These are big names. Putnam is a big name. Lewis is a big name in philosophy. Sider is a big name. So this person saying, I'm going to do something that they did not do, which is a big claim. So they're going to say the external criticism. They're going to start to say anti-realists are wrong. Forego realist assumptions for minimal anti-realist ones. What do we got? Loyalist. Okay, that's for Viper's people he took down. All right. Forego realist assumptions for minimal anti-realist ones. On the anti-realist model, many different groups of properties are preferred by theorizers. For example, natural properties, gratural properties, whatever. So it's like God A, God B, God C. Pick your God, or pick your nature A, nature B, nature C, whichever one you want. Theorizers may prefer different properties, but a ubiquitous feature of properties with value theoretic upshots is that they are preferred. Only properties that are preferred possess value. The value theoretic demarcation occurs neither between the natural and unnatural properties nor between the gratural and ungratural properties, but instead between the preferred and unpreferred properties. Yeah, so like you get to pick what you like in the world. That's all it is. Therefore, call the anti-realist valuable properties those that have they're explained in virtue of preferences prefactual. Okay, so your preferences for what you call natural. Since anti-realism entails that prefactual properties ought to feature in theories, explanatory normativity applies. If prefactual properties ought to feature in theories, then there must be an explanation for why they ought to feature in theories. The challenge I pose here is to explain why, when theorizing, we should care about what properties are and are not preferred. To explain why preferred properties matter. Simply reiterating or paraphrasing that a set of properties is preferred goes no way in explaining. However, as the anti-realist establishes valuable properties to be those that are preferred, it appears that they are restricted to appealing to some feature, or rather, of preferences to explain. Yet this only works when one assumes that theories ought to utilize properties we prefer. I mean, that's what they're saying, that's the definition. I mean, sure. Simply being preferred tells us nothing as to why these properties are the only ones that ought to feature in theories, unless one assumes that the only properties that ought to feature in theories are those that are preferred. Well, yeah, that's why you prefer them, is because you like them, but that's it. After all, just being preferred does not make a property valuable any more than calling someone Goodman makes them virtuous. Be my guest, posit a set of properties that you prefer if you want, but play fair. Do not call it preferred unless you have shown it to be something that should guide theorizing. Just like realism requires the value of natural properties to fall freely from an unfair positive structure, anti-realism requires the value of prefactual properties to fall freely from an unfair posit about preferences. I don't know. I think you can outline why you prefer stuff. They can't define realism, but I can tell you why I prefer certain theories over another. So I'm not actually sure. Like, I can see what this person's doing. They're trying to rerun the argument on people's preferences and say you can't explain your fundamental preferences. Quite often we can explain our fundamental preferences, though. Like, why not? I mean, I can't just give you another definition of natural without saying, well, it is natural. But I, a lot of times, can break down why I like stuff. Okay. What is descriptive language and therefore logic grounded in natural properties, maybe? I mean, I can't... hold on one sec. Getting knocks on the door. 1 minute. Where's my be right back? There we go. Okay, we may be flooding slightly here. That's bad, but there's nothing. Also, on the other hand, there's nothing I can do about that, so we will continue stream. It's not good. Okay. So, yeah, so what were we saying? We were saying, look, how do you actually define your preferences? You just have to say, well, these are your base preferences, and then this person's going to say, well, you are in no better position as an anti-realist than the realist, because basically at base you have fundamental preferences, but you can't explain those. Okay. Author says, I suspect there will be resistance to the claim that preferences are all that matter, and in fact, when asked to explain why prefactual properties matter, the answer is because preferences explain why those properties have value. Yet this simply pushes the burden from preferences to explanation. In this case, a ubiquitous feature explained by all valuable properties is not that they are preferred, but that they have their value explained. Call these properties explatural. So the fact that they can be explained. Okay, so this person is going to keep trying to push it back. Very, very cute. The valuable properties are those that have their value explained. From here, the explanatory normativity once more applies. If explatural properties ought to feature in theories, then there must be an explanation for why they ought to feature in theories. And again, the value of explatural properties is required to fall freely from the fact that they are explained. Properties with their value explained being valuable because they are putatively explained is no more acceptable than the realist claiming that properties that follow the world structure are valuable because they follow the world's structure. This is a little bit unfair. You get a lot more information, I think. What came first, the prefiction or the explanation? Exactly. And this is the thing. Like, you can keep asking why. That's what this person did. So, well, you can ask why. Why do you like that? Why do you like that? And why do you like that? He says, well, you just do at a certain point. And it says, well, then you're no better than me, when I just said it was natural. That seems unfair because you may have given a lot more information about stuff in that. And they say, well, why is that information good? Well, it's just explanatory information that's good. Well, it's because there's a lot more there then. And just declaring that, see, here's the problem. From before, they said, this is the way the world is, and you can't ask anymore. The problem is, if you have given all this further explanation, maybe there is more to discuss in there. And so I'm not really on board with this, but you can see what they did. They said, well, look, if you can give an explanation, you have to say why that explanation confers value. And, yeah. So it's like, you can keep pushing it back, and then at some point you have to just stop. All argumentation just stops at some point. You just say, well, that's the way it is. Even if it's preferences or how you define the world. So, like, I see what this author has done, very clever, but I'm kind of like, one person gave a much fuller description, and you just said, no, it's the way it is. Yeah, at least one dead. Yeah, people, they were telling people not to go driving because of flash floods, because that's what happens. People get caught up in their car and then they can't get out and then they drown. I wouldn't be too surprised if that's what happened. They were saying stuff like that was either it happened or was expected. Okay, so the author knows that this is a tu quoque, saying you're doing the same shit we are. So from this tu quoque, the combination of anti-realism and explanatory normativity leads to the following reductio. Assume anti-realism. Assume explanatory normativity. From 1 and 2, there must be an explanation that meets the anti-realist non-objective standards for why prefactual or explatral properties have value. There is no explanation for why prefactual or explatral properties have value. Anti-realism is false, and this contradicts the first premise, assuming anti-realism. Anti-realists face the same dilemma as realists. One solution for committed anti-realists is to simply join realists in rejecting explanatory normativity in favor of primitive normativity and the unexplained intrinsic value of preferences. Yeah, see, they're saying, okay, but what your preferences are just primitive. But like, you can be like, there's reasons why we have the preferences we do. There's like evolutionary theory for why we like stuff. Tanira says, so on both sides lies the burden of proof. Yeah, that's what this is. They even the author even called themselves out. They called it a tu quoque. They're basically saying you're in no better position than we are. And that's fair, but I'm not sure it's exactly on equal footing. But they're saying basically, neither side can explain everything away. Everyone has to stop explaining at a certain point and just say, this is what we like. Like one person saying it's realism and one person saying it's preferences. So yeah. So both sides have to explain that, but neither side can really finish explaining it. So in doing so, they legitimize primitive normativity and dissolve any concerns about my reply to the internal criticism being problematically defensive. Yeah, because if saying you can't explain your preferences why you like stuff. Well, why do we have to explain why we like realism? But sure. So it makes some sense at least. But again, I'm very concerned that I just gave a lot of explanation and like why my preferences a certain way. Maybe my preferences have like, evolutionary sort of explanations. Maybe there's other stuff there. Like there's a lot of interesting stuff. So I'm not exactly, when the realist says this is at the end, the anti-realist says, well, maybe there's a whole lot of stuff and can't explain all of it. But again, there's a lot of stuff. So it feels like the anti-realist does a lot more work here. So that's just maybe me being an anti-realist. Okay, perhaps this view is palatable for some, but if the sole motivation for anti-realism is that it meets the demand of explanatory normativity, anti-realists now lack a positive reason to be anti-realist. Yeah, so that's fair. If you were declaring explanatory normativity, then everyone has to stop at some point. Everyone has to stop explaining at some point, because you just can't explain everything. Okay, the value of explanation. Alternatively, those inclined to retain explanatory normativity and reject both realism and anti-realism face bigger issues. For one, on the assumption that the only viable means of construing explanation are realist or anti-realist, then there is now no plausible conception of explanation available to formulate explanatory normativity. This aside, the most significant problem for explanatory normativity stems from the fact that it rests on implicitly assuming the only valuable properties are those with an explanation for why they are valuable. As Descupta writes, there must be some explanation. Without explanation, those properties are not valuable. However, it is reasonable to ask why explanation matters. Earlier in the paper, I highlighted Dreyer's second-order explanatory demand applying to primitive normativity and a similar second-order demand also applying to explanatory normativity. Just because one adopts a stance that normative facts are explained does not support the affirmation that there must be some explanation. Descupta assumes that explanation is a prerequisite for normativity, and my complaint is that there is no good reason for this assumption. I think that's fair. Like I said, explanation is a Wittgensteinian point. You have to stop explaining at some point. You always do. And so always insisting that there must be an explanation is actually dogmatic. This challenge is met on the provision of an explanation for why there must be an explanation. Yeah, so here, this is exactly where the author is going. Very smart. Recall that the realists meet this challenge by adopting an intrinsic conception of value to explain why primitive normativity is correct. A similar move is needed in defense of explanatory normativity, adopting a conception of value that explains why explanatory normativity is correct. Contra the intrinsic value suggested for realism, instrumental value is the likely candidate to allow for the claim. Properties with their value explained are valuable because the kind of value they possess only obtains when an explanation is provided. Viper says, my main takeaway from this paper is that philosophers are kids who never stopped asking why and remain equally, if not more, annoying. Vipers, you should have known that already, but like, yes. A lot of this stuff is just people being like, well, what about this? 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 You're wrong because you couldn't answer all my questions. So that's not unusual. I mean, I think this is a pretty smart paper for what it is, but again, you have to this is kind of a little navel-gazy. You have to be in this debate to care about this stuff. So yeah. Though, if explanatory normativity is concerned exclusively with this kind of value, it does not serve as a universal criterion for determining what properties do and do not have value, and therefore pose no threat to the realist position I have outlined, nor primitive normativity in general. Don't make him get his poker. Additional, well, I think my take, Tinderos gets the door, oh god. We're playing Dory Poker again, are we? Additionally, it is worth noting that my argument is an iteration of the following question. If something is explained, is it explained that it is explained? And you see, Vipers called this out earlier. I mean, if it is explained, is it explained that it explained? Gupta remarks that this kind of question stems from a general worry resulting from doing metaphysics in terms of explanation and not doing anything about normativity nor anti-realism specifically. So this is exactly it. We're just doing metaphysics in terms of explanation here. It's just metaphysics. We're just doing metaphysics. What it is. This This line of reasoning does not offer any respite, as the challenge can be reformulated for those who approach metaphysics in terms of explanation. If metaphysics ought to be done in terms of explanation, there ought to be some explanation for why we should approach metaphysics in terms of explanation. Yeah. Does Gupta need to kill Patrick's 5 level of evaluation waffle? Yeah. Hey, Retheus, what's going on? My throat's almost dead. This place is flooding, and actually no, maybe the rain stopped and we didn't flood. Like we were very close to getting flooded. Getting water in like the basement here. Find out in a few minutes, but when I get off. But otherwise, I'm okay. I hope you're well. And my throat's still screwed. But I hope you're doing good, Retheus. Okay, yeah. So if you have to have a metaphysics of explanation, then you have to have an explanation why the metaphysics is of explanation ad nauseum. Most seem to have mostly avoided the flood. Yeah, but it's bad if we get flooded here. It's like, it's not good. Like, because water gets everywhere and then you have to like replace walls and shit in the basement. It's bad. It's not great. But like, we weren't flooded yet, and it may have let up enough that we didn't get flooded. I don't know. Okay. There ought to be some explanation for why we should approach metaphysics in terms of explanation, for which there is no good answer. Similarly, the challenge is not resolved by embracing something akin to Schaffer's proposed solution to the inference problem. It is the role of explanation to evaluate. Such a move rests upon merely stipulating a connection between explanation and value and not explaining it, which, if acceptable, allows a realist to solve the problem by stipulating a connection between objective structure and value. Yeah, so it's like, alright, if you are sticking to your guns and saying explanation is the most important thing in the world, then you have to explain explanation, but then you get again into the circularities. Overall, the most succinct way to summarize this argument is that just calling some property explained does not make it valuable any more than calling someone more makes them multiply. Be my guest, posit that explanation determines what is and is not valuable if you want, but play fair when playing fair. Do not interweave explanation with value until you have shown explanation to be the deciding factor for what is and is not valuable. Everyone here is permitted to use their respective primitives. The realist is free to assume without further explanation that the valuable properties are those that align with the objective structure, and as Gupta is free to assume without further explanation that the valuable properties are those that have their value explained. It cannot be objectionable for value to inexplicably arise from natural properties if one is also assuming value inexplicably arises from being explained. Okay. It reminds me of that one time in New Zealand where I was in a forest with a machete and a balded guy with a bloody stick and a white leather apron just came out of nowhere. You see, that's the sort of thing you gotta wonder how you got yourself into that position. So you're standing there with a machete and a guy looks like he came out of a Brookshire shop and you're like, okay, I guess we're gonna have to agree to walk away at this point. That's interesting. Okay, so let's give this one a review. I gotta get off soon because I want to go see how things are. He was just a trap hunter. Okay. So did brain dance again? Did this have fun ideas? Did this make big claims that shriveled up? Navel gazing only for academics. I'm gonna give this one some navels. I'm Leatherface the White. This is getting some knives too, because this whole argument was one big slice and dice. Nog, knife, nog, knife. So it was very analytic. But the thing is, the question is getting two navels and two. Oh, he was a nice guy. Yeah. Well, I mean, how pointy was the stick is really the question. Like, if it was like a very like pointy, pokey stick, maybe, and it was longer, maybe it was more of a pole, you know. Tyndareus, yeah, I'm gonna give this a yay too, because it was, for what it was very good. I thought they pulled off their argument well. So this is like actually really, this is not terrible analytic philosophy. So if like this is not like gonna get a golden turd from me because it didn't make any claims it didn't back up. Like it was okay. It wasn't pointy, but the stick in him was full of blood. Yeah, see, that's the thing. If it was more like a pole, like a staff, like a javelin or something, then maybe it would have been a more interesting fight, like a knife versus a spear. So yeah, from the trapped animals. Okay. Anyone else want to get in on the review on this one? Because Tyndareus, thank you, and myself, that's fine if no one else wants to. But yeah, I got to get off soon, so please make it quick. I'm going to go find someone to raid, and we'll be gone. And I think Anne's on, so I'll probably just raid Anne because I like raiding Anne. Yeah, let's go raid Anne. Okay. So, thank you all for being here. Yeah, as always. Well, I raided Prof. Lara the other day. Yeah, last time I raided Prof. Lara. But, maybe you missed that. You agree? You also gave it a turd. Yeah, I think I'm not thinking it was all style, because it didn't make any big claims and just turned to be shit. It was just like, it was just navel gazy for me. Alright, so let's get out of here. I'm gonna raid and run because I got other stuff to do. But thank you all for